Everyone still has life challenges. So much of it depends on perspective, just how they're viewing their situation and their life scenario. So many people view day-to-day events as traumatic. And most of the time, it's not really traumatic. It might be dramatic, just something difficult, but it's all about perspective. A big source of burnout is actually not having balance in your life. For some people, the burnout isn't even with work. It's they're burned out in their home life, which affects their ability to work. You need to be able to move on, and that's part of learning how to separate and how to kind of adapt to that change.
Welcome back to Beyond the Briefcase. This is the show where we explore law, life, leadership, and everything that matters once the briefcase closes. I'm your host, Matt Goodwin. Today's episode is one I've really been looking forward to. So we're not just talking about success. We're talking about sustainability. Not just mindset, but mental fitness. Not just leadership, but the kind that lasts. My guest today is Dr. Stephen Cohen. He's a licensed clinical psychologist and the co-owner of the Center for Psychology in Southwest Florida. He's worked with kids, adults, physicians, attorneys, entrepreneurs, and he's built a reputation for helping high performers protect their mental health without compromising their mission. What makes Dr. Cohen's work stand out is the way he combines mindfulness, real-world strategy, and a deep understanding of what makes us tick. Today, we're talking about boundaries, burnout, mental clarity, professional longevity, and how to stay grounded while doing work that matters. If you're a business owner, a high achiever, or just someone running hard but forgetting to breathe, this one's for you. Let's go beyond the briefcase with Dr. Stephen Cohen. Morning, Dr.
Good morning.
Cohen.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. So, let me ask you a question. What if the secret to sustainable success isn't doing more, but becoming more aware? That's
Deep.
It's deep. Or it's deep. So let me rephrase that. All right. You work with such a wide range of people.
Yes.
Children, physicians, attorneys. And when I first heard that, it made me realize, well, I know they have child specialists, and then they have some psychologists that work with professionals. I thought that was an interesting dynamic. But then I realized most professionals have children, and I could see where you could bridge the gap with those conversations, and that could really be beneficial. What's the common thread that you see across all of your patient types when it comes to mental and emotional strain?
So let me give you a little background before I answer that, if that's all right. So
Sure, yeah.
I started my career in pediatric psychology. So I was working with children with chronic illness specifically.
Okay.
And that's where most of my training was. And what I sort of realized is when you're working with, these children, you're also working with the family, the siblings, the parents, grandparents. So you have to look at the whole picture. You can't just look at who you're working with. You have to look at the dynamics, the system, everybody involved. Mm-hmm. Whether or not a child would have whatever chronic illness they had, they still had to deal with all the other life issues that they deal with. And so did the family. So what I figured out was everyone, and this is the common thread you're asking about, everyone still has life challenges. And so much of it depends on perspective, just how they're viewing their situation and their life scenario. The kids that I would work with that were chronically ill, they had terminal cancer, let's say. The ones that had a positive mindset, or the family that had a more positive mindset, they accepted it, but were able to cope better, did better than the ones that viewed it as unfair or wrong or just like end of the world.
Right.
So applying that same concept to everyday life. And so many people view day-to-day events as traumatic, as the worst thing ever. And most of the time, it's not really traumatic. It might be dramatic or just something difficult, but it's all about perspective. And that, I think, is the common thread that I've really identified.
I mean, it makes sense. The values you're instilled with as a child and are mostly coming from your immediate family. And if you have a family that's sort of the scarcity mindset, or they're negative, or they're watching the news every day and they can't help but be negative,
Right.
then when something hits you hard, then you all of a sudden that victim mentality kicks in and it's substantiated.
Agreed. And it's so much of it, we learn certain traits or behaviors when we're younger, but too often people use that as sort of an excuse for not changing, for not having growth. They define themselves by their experiences as opposed to learning from those experiences and using that to elicit a change.
Yeah, that's something that reminds me of early on when I was sort of exploring how to manage people and thinking of, well, I got to first learn how to manage myself. And if I don't get that right, then good luck trying to manage somebody else. And thinking of every failure as a learning experience was not easy at first, where you had to find the silver lining. And now I look at myself as one of the, that's one of my strong points, where one of our core values at Goodwin Law is positive, right? So there's a positive in every failure. One of the stories that comes up is Thomas Edison's and the light bulb. It took him, he learned 10,000 ways that he couldn't make the light bulb, and then he finally got it right. And so I think there's some overlap there. Well, for someone who looks successful on paper, but feels completely off track internally, where should they even begin?
Well, it's hard. It varies by person, but oftentimes the reality is there are people that are successful on paper, but never have that confidence or that sense of self that they've developed where they trust that they can do what they're setting out to do. They have these credentials, they've gone to school, they've done XYZ and had these experiences, but they still feel that sort of sense of not being genuine or being imposter syndrome type stuff. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, they're looking at it through a filter. We all have our own bias about this. And, and a simple way to look at it is we never feel like we're grown up, right? We get older, but even when we're around people that are younger than us, we often will kind of identify with that age group in some ways. Mm-hmm. So we always have this kind of dissonance, this conflict in our own brain about what is and what isn't real. When we're challenging what our paper life looks like versus our real life, we need to look at the reality and how it actually impacts others. So often people will say, thank you did such a great job. And the people that are not confident in that will dismiss the compliment.
Yeah.
Which in turn makes the person that gave the compliment feel less appreciated because they're valuing your service. And if you're devaluing it, then it makes them start to question it. So it kind of creates this cycle. Instead of accepting it and recognizing that even if I didn't feel like I did the greatest job, if that person feels like I did, I still serve the purpose. And sometimes that's enough.
That's powerful because I've struggled with that for many years where you get a genuine compliment, you're not sure how to receive it. And over time, I never thought of how that affected the compliment giver.
Right.
So that's interesting.
Well, and a lot of these insecurities or these self-doubts that we have overrule our ability to observe how it is affecting others. So we don't get that feedback. And it might be as simple as thinking someone's angry with us. Well, if I assume, if you and I have a conversation and I think, oh, he's probably really mad at me right now, well, I'm going to have that bias. So even if you're not angry with me, I'm likely to do things to elicit that response from you.
Interesting. So it's self-fulfilling prophecy,
Exactly.
Manifestation.
Right.
Well, I wrote down the word cognitive dissonance. Can you
Sure.
elaborate on what you meant by that?
Yes. So dissonance, think of it as like a conflict. So cognitive is just a fancy word for thoughts. So cognitive dissonance is when we have these competing thoughts. You might go in and you want to order a salad, something healthy, and then this other part of your brain is saying, no, get the chicken wings. So you get this sort of dissonance, this battle between them.
Okay. And so, that and in terms of receiving the compliment, but not really feeling you were worthy of it, that's where you people struggle with this cognitive dissonance. Well, moving on to some of the people that you deal with, they're high-performing professionals. Why is it so hard for high-performing professionals to slow down, even though they know that they need to?
It's a great question. A lot of times because they believe if they slow down, they'll stop and lose momentum and won't be able to keep going. Oftentimes, their drive is so much that it doesn't mean they're always confident. They just believe they have to keep going, or somebody will discover that they're an imposter, or they're not as good as they are, or some flaw. Not always the case, but often it is. Other times, they don't know what else to do.
With their time.
Yeah. So they're going all the time. And if you ask them to stop, they have this overwhelming feeling that they're not doing something they should do. They left the stove on kind of thing.
Yeah. I think about that when I started learning how to meditate, where you feel it like it's a counterproductive use of your time. But then I listened to a book, can't remember which one, but somebody said that you gain 9 minutes of the day with every 1 minute of meditation. And maybe it's more conservative than that, but I remembered that. I was thinking, all right, well, that's easy. And that's because you're more productive with the time that you are spending focus on something because you learned how to slow your mind down.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's funny, before I started meditating, somebody had said to me, if you don't have 15 minutes a day to meditate, you should meditate for 30 minutes. And I was like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And, I've been meditating pretty much daily now for the last 15, 17 years. And now I get it. That statement makes sense to me.
Did it take you 15 years to get it?
It did not. It took me a couple years, though, honestly, before I really started to recognize that the benefit of being able to focus my thoughts and just be present, and how much that helps with decision-making, time management, confidence, and just a sense of self.
Well, I know many people in the medical and the legal field that could relate with that statement in your first 2 years, where they just are still at that introductory stage. They don't know the benefits. They don't think there's any benefits, but they certainly would benefit because I believe they all would. For someone, so then they end up getting burnt out, and then maybe by the time they have some catastrophic illness or some spat with their health, they're like, maybe I should try to meditate now. They've heard enough people do it. Do you think burnout is still misunderstood or minimized in the professional communities like law and medicine?
I think it's misunderstood. Yes. I think the term often is misused and sort of overgeneralized.
Okay.
Burnout can be different things depending on context, and it'll apply differently depending on the individual. So for some people, the burnout isn't even with work. They're burned out in their home life, which affects their ability to work.
Okay.
With others, it's the reverse. Their work is so stressful that they don't have balance. So I think a big source of burnout is actually not having balance in your life.
And do you think that people will could misinterpret their burnout with the reverse, meaning they think they're burnt out at work and it's affecting their home life?
Absolutely.
They're actually burnt out with their home life, and it's this vicious cycle.
Yes, I see that quite often, actually. And sometimes it's both. But it gets to the point where if somebody's so overwhelmed or stressed or unable to function in one environment that they don't have any leftover resource to deal with others. So it's kind of like if, let's say you're in school and you have 4 classes and you're behind in all of them. So you start cranking out math and you get caught up. Well, as you're getting caught up in math, you're still getting further behind in all the other subjects. So then you switch to English and you start working to get caught up in English, but then you're starting to fall behind in math again. And they just can't catch up. And it's because they're trying to go all in on one area of their life and not finding that balance and looking at everything as equally important. And that includes self-care.
Yeah, I think you could apply that to every aspect of life: self-care, home life, work. extracurricular activities,
Right.
whatever you like to do. Well, one thing I've noticed with business owners is how often they say yes when they really mean maybe or not now. How do you help people protect their time and energy without feeling guilty about it?
That's also a good question. There's a couple of things to that. One is being okay with saying no and accepting that that isn't failure, that isn't rejection. But also, sometimes it's okay to say yes in a way to get the other person to say no. So, for example, let's say we're coworkers and you come up to me and ask me to do you a favor. Hey, can you take care of this case for me and follow up with this and this? Mm-hmm. So I could say, sure, I can do that, but I've got this on my plate, so I'll take care of that for you if you can do this. And usually the other person that's asking is going to be like, oh, no, never mind, because they're not wanting to take anything else onto their plate. Uh-huh. So you're like, okay, so you said yes, but you get them to sort of say no.
I really like that. I think I might have to use that tomorrow, maybe today. And speaking of using and applying this advice that you're giving and the advice that I give people, it's sometimes hard to take your own advice. I feel like we all need practice in what we preach.
Yes.
Right? They say that physicians are their own worst patients. Lawyers are their own worst clients. And I think that we just need sometimes reality checks, and we need to start. And that's where I think journaling helps out. Do you have a habit of journaling yourself?
I don't. Journaling is great. Everyone has their own style of being able to sort of express themselves. So for some people, it's journaling. For others, it's painting or artwork.
Okay.
For me, it's yoga, actually. That's my outlet where I feel like I can just be and get things out, or I'll scuba dive where I can just
get lost.
Yeah. Hopefully not, but
remember to breathe, right? Just get lost in breathing. Well, that's interesting because I've struggled with journaling for years, and the advocate, the John Maxwell, for instance, who everybody looks up to, he's a huge advocate of journaling, and all these people say this is the game changer. I mean, so that's interesting to hear that you don't have a habit, but you're still doing all right. I'm still working on it myself. I feel like the thoughts coming up in my head is enough, but then there's this element of our memory is limited, right? So I use Apple Notes a lot, where I'll use the notepad, and I'm not journaling. I'm not writing it with a hand, but I am sort of typing it out, things like that. Do you do stuff like that?
I will. When I was working on my book several years ago, I'd be driving and I'd just, some random thoughts would pop on my head. So I would just hit record and speak it in, things like that. So, and that's what I mean. There's different uses. So journaling for that purpose, for me, yeah. For writing emotions and expressing myself, that writing that way doesn't give me that same kind of comfort or clarity
so the
as it does for others.
The audio journal or the verbal journal, the spoken journal, right? So if there's anybody out there listening that has struggle with journaling, don't worry about it. You're not alone, number one. Number two, you can still get by and have the same benefits of doing other forms of venting, right? And I shouldn't have even said that word. I'm actually a proponent against the word venting. I feel like venting has a negative connotation to it. Now, as a psychologist that speaks to people for a living, you're the recipient of a lot of venting, right?
Yeah, so it's interesting you bring that up because to me, venting means getting something out and then moving on.
Okay.
So typically, people will get something out, but then they keep repeating it. So they're not really venting.
Was that rumination?
Sometimes, or it's stuck for whatever reason. And rumination is kind of a degree of severity, I would say. But people have a hard time moving on from things. And that's a big part of what we work on in treatment is just helping them accept where they are and then focusing on where they want to be and what can they do to get there. And that's not always the same from person to person. But some people just think, well, I just need to get this out. And that's fine.
Yeah.
But if that's really what you need, then you get it out and then you don't need to keep getting it out.
Yeah.
You can move on.
Even though it feels good sometimes, you actually think it's good, but it's not. It can be counterproductive, especially if you're venting about the same things constantly.
Right.
Or regularly.
Because then you're just complaining. You're not venting. Venting is you get it out, you move on.
Yeah, and that creates the complaining culture, or a culture of complaining, with not only you, your immediate family, but the people you are most closest to on a regular basis. And then it just spreads.
Right.
Like
and then
virus.
you're literally focusing on the negative aspect of it and where you're stuck instead of, you're more problem focused instead of solution focused. You're just focusing on what you don't like instead of how you want things to be.
I like that. Well, speaking of mindfulness and skepticism, you use mindfulness-based cognitive therapy in your work.
Correct.
Now, how do you present those tools to professionals who are results-driven and want to see tangible value before they really buy into it?
So it varies, but usually I won't bring up the mindfulness until aspect of things, which is more the meditation and part of it, until I've developed a little bit of a relationship with the person.
Okay.
I'll usually start more with the cognitive aspect of it. Cognitive therapy being looking at certain thought patterns and then trying to change the way you think about it, which is at crux great, and that works. It's just if we add the mindfulness aspect to it, it's kind of like a booster shot. It works that much better.
And an example of the mindfulness is practicing meditation.
Practicing meditation, or it could be what I refer to as like mindful moments, where it's just taking a minute or two and just being where you are and letting yourself be in that experience. But it's intentional. It's with purpose. That's kind of the key variable there.
Well, I see you have an Apple Watch on, and I know Apple has this feature on there that says mindful moments, and you can set it to remind you to be mindful. I've tried it a couple of times, and then I was like, oh, you just kind of forget to look down, or you just don't wear the watch that day.
It's fun. Yeah, and there's different ways that I'll kind of have people do it. You know, I'll have them brush their teeth with their non-dominant hand, or stir spaghetti noodles with their opposite hand. Just little tasks that you can do, but it forces you to be present in that moment.
I like that. Stir spaghetti noodles with, maybe stir your coffee with the opposite hand.
There you go.
That's interesting. And
Or
then
drink with your other hand. You know, like again, little things. It just makes you more cognizant and more aware and present.
Well, so how does your approach really support things like focus or mental clarity in decision making?
That kind of falls back on how do people make decisions? And this varies from person to person. You know, what is it that drives them? Some are financially driven. Some are relationship driven. Some are, their view of success is different than another person's view of success.
Okay.
So in order to answer that, that would be my first step, is figuring out what their view of success, what their goals are. And sometimes they're not even aware of what their goals are. They think they know, but they're really just going based on what everyone tells them they think their goals are. But it doesn't make them feel satisfied or content. So that's the first part, is helping them figure that out and having that insight and self-awareness. And then we can figure out direction.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I've struggled with goal setting myself, and every time I set a goal with intention and break it down into smaller parts, I might reach that goal before the deadline that I set for myself, or I might totally forget about it and set a new goal and then the cycle repeats itself. How do you help people that are bad with goal setting really start to get in the habit of setting goals? Is there a place to start? Maybe think of the children that you've counseled, or their parents that struggle with it still.
Sometimes it's recognizing, like when you're setting goals and not following through, it's looking at what's getting in the way.
Okay.
So either that goal isn't something you really want to accomplish, or being stuck is sort of being reinforced. So let me give you an example, if I may. Mm-hmm. Let's say I have someone that is overweight and they come in because they've tried, 15 different diets or pills and things, and they just can't lose the weight. And they're wanting to figure out why. So, I'll talk to them, and let's say they're not in a relationship and they're really not happy with themselves. So I'll ask them, well, what's the benefit of you being overweight? And they look at me like you're looking at me right now. Like, what kind of question is that? and I'll talk to them. And eventually, though, it comes out. Because if you're wanting to lose weight, but you're not, and you keep sabotaging yourself, there's something that's reinforcing that. So in the one case that's in my head right now, the person was in their mid-40s, single, and wanted to date, but they didn't want to date until they lost weight. And they were terrified of rejection. So being overweight gave them an excuse to not start dating, to not have to worry about being rejected. The other was they basically were afraid they wouldn't be successful if they lost weight. So, and they wouldn't have the weight as that sort of excuse. Once we identified that, we came up with some other ways for them to sort of feel safe, security without the weight, to feel like they could go on a date or
Meaning
could
boosting their self-esteem before they had what they thought would boost their self-esteem?
Kind of. And some of it is just recognizing that even if they lost the weight, they could still wait to start dating. Or I gave them other options, and they started to lose weight and kept it off, actually.
That's a good story. Well, as someone who was overweight as a child, I didn't start losing weight until about 9th grade when I became conscious of it. But I do think the self-esteem part was huge, because as being overweight as a child lowers your self-esteem unless you have somebody that's helping you boost it or keep it strong, or you're just one of those people that can do that, right?
Yeah, and you know, that's one of the other benefits of mindfulness. It's one activity that actually strengthens our willpower, our sense of motivation and control. I do want to address one thing you just said, which is self-esteem. Quite often, when I have people come in, they'll argue or they're offended by that term, that they have low self-esteem.
Okay.
So you can have someone that's extremely insecure and self-conscious, and they'll acknowledge that. But if you use the term self-esteem, they fight you. And then I'll have others that are the exact opposite, where they're like, yeah, I have really low self-esteem, but I'm a confident person. And I'm like, okay. And you can be confident in some areas.
All right.
But people get hung up a lot on vocabulary and different terms, you know, have different meanings. Some are, they vary over time. You know, like we used venting before. That's a good example of that. But there's a lot of terms like that. So
you mean like lawyers and doctors?
Exactly.
Surprise. They're literal, right?
Yeah. So sometimes people hear comments like that and they think, oh, well, that's for people with low self-esteem, which doesn't apply to me. And it's kind of like, well, everyone has areas that they're confident in and less confident in.
Right.
And I think the tricky part is accepting that and being okay with that everyone has strengths and weaknesses.
And some people using the right word is a weakness.
Exactly.
Or a strength, in your case.
Yeah.
Who thinks about these things. Well, you certainly have a tough audience or a tough client base. Being in that pool myself, where you work with the local Collier County Bar Association and now the Lee County Bar Association and know the Collier County Medical Society, you have a very, very challenging working field there. So we talk a lot about personal longevity on this show, but what about professional longevity? So what mental habits help people lead well long-term?
I think a big part of that is knowing what you enjoy or why you're doing what you do.
Your purpose?
And your purpose.
Knowing your purpose in the profession that you've chosen?
Yeah, or just in your day-to-day activities even. So not just the global worldview of your profession, but, you know, with me, it's, you know, every patient I work with, you know, why am I doing that? And if it's not always that I see this huge change in somebody, or oftentimes when people are doing better, I don't see them anymore. So there isn't, you know, occasionally I'll get a call like 5 years later about how awesome this person's doing or whatever, but that doesn't always happen. But I love what I do. You know, for me, it's the puzzle and kind of seeing people think about things differently. And even if they disagree with me, if I'm getting an emotional reaction from them, a charge, I know that it's creating or eliciting some change in them,
Yeah, that's good
thought.
stuff.
So for other people, it's knowing what drives them and what they enjoy about what they're doing. Oftentimes, and this is where the burnout really kicks in, is people focus on what they don't like about their job, and that becomes overwhelming.
Okay.
And they lose focus of the why and what purpose they have in what they're doing.
Lately, I found myself when someone starts to even sound like they're complaining, I just stop them or try to get away. And instead, what I've been trying to do is listen, painfully sometimes, to that complaint and then flip it on the script. And that takes a lot of practice. It also takes a lot out of you the more you do that. You know, I'm meeting with people that are either making the biggest purchase or sale of their life when it comes to a real estate transaction, or they're dealing with the death of a loved one. And they come in with this heavy burden, or maybe they're planning for their estate because they've recently lost a loved one who didn't have a plan in place. And so it's a mixed bag, the people that walk through my door as well. We deal with a lot of people who are going through a divorce and selling their property as a piece to that puzzle. And that's challenging in and of itself, having to deal with. So I like what you say about, really looking at the purpose. I think you can apply that to what's the purpose of whatever the task is at hand, so you don't get stuck in pursuing
and
somebody
when,
else's.
if somebody's complaining, like you were saying, and you're listening and then reframing it for them. That's the cognitive aspect where you're getting them to think about the same thing from a different perspective. You're not telling them what they're thinking is right or wrong. You're just helping them practice thinking about it in different ways.
Yeah, and that's where you said mindfulness comes into play, and something just dawned on me where when you're to avoid succumbing to someone else's complaining and becoming negative yourself, you have to reflect on that on a regular basis so you don't become that complainer yourself.
Yeah, the nice thing about my job is, one, it's always been sort of natural for me to reframe things. That's just, I think, what kind of drew me to this field. But I'm literally doing that all day, every day, and teaching people how to do it. So it's so automatic for me. Sometimes my wife will probably say to a fault.
I was just going to ask you.
where they'll say something in a negative way, and I just automatically present it in a positive.
Did you get sick of that guy or girl who's always so positive and you just can't stand them?
I get that often. No.
We had a teacher that I never forgot who seemed to have a permanent grin affixed on her face, to the point where we thought it had to have been fake. But one thing that I teach in with my employees and with others is you force a smile. You pick up the phone. And so if somebody's mad about something or you're having a bad day, just literally force a smile with your fingers, and it's incredible what that does. Not only does it come through in the tone of your voice, but it'll actually make you feel happier too.
Yeah, and the beauty of that is it's contagious. It actually spreads. So if you're smiling and somebody else is around you, they're going to see that and mirror it, and then they'll smile. And it
You got to be ready for that, everyone. If you want to start forcing smiles, be ready for happiness to start following you around and finding you.
Exactly.
Right? And it really is a thing. So you might want to be negative. I remember Zig Ziglar once said, he was talking to somebody. Of course, he's long dead now. One of the guys I used to listen to on cassette tape, he said somebody at a conference that came up to him that, she was so negative, and sometimes you just want to enjoy your moment. You want to complain. It's like, this is my turn to be mad. I want to be mad right now, and don't take that away from me. And then that person that comes in tries to be that positive light.
So people try to fix
frustrate.
it. That's another big issue is somebody, you're right. It's okay for someone to be upset or angry or hurt, depending on the scenario. Mm-hmm. So when we try to fix it, essentially we're saying to them that what they're feeling is wrong. And I promise you, if you want to piss someone off, just tell them that what they're feeling is wrong, or they shouldn't feel that way.
So never say to somebody that what they're feeling is wrong.
100%
That's definitely
agree with
worth
that.
repeating because
Yes.
I feel like that's a really easy thing to not realize you're doing. It's kind of like when you tell your spouse to relax, right? Isn't that one of the trigger words for most people?
Yep.
Yeah, you need to just chill out.
Or don't worry about it.
But it's used so loosely these days that it's become a sort of a cultural thing where we're just like, don't worry about it, no big deal. But then it becomes a big deal and you don't realize what the big deal actually is before it's too late.
Correct.
I could see that.
And it never works out well. Saying, relax, don't worry about
Well,
it.
let me ask you this. Is there one emotional behavior that tends to shorten careers?
Emotional behavior. I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Maybe
I integrate that.
ruminating on something, taking your patient's or client's problems home with you.
Yeah, I get what you mean. It varies a lot, but
Sadness, anger.
it's usually when somebody focuses on something some change, and they won't accept it. So for physicians, when it switched over to electronic records, a lot of the older ones had a really hard time with that. A lot of the younger ones still have a hard time with it, but
Yeah.
it was so different, and they fought it. So it's that fighting against something that we don't have control over, or that we know we have to do it, but we still fight it. That's where we just waste energy and exhaust ourselves.
Yeah, I've said to before, you have to embrace the suck, right? This stinks, right? And just embrace the change, be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
100%.
And eventually the thing that's creating the tension will become easier, and then you can laugh about it.
You can adapt, right? You can acclimate to whatever it is that's you're complaining about or feeling stuck on, and just adjust accordingly.
Well, on that note, is there one emotional behavior that supports resilience and growth?
I think that there's a few things that contribute to that. One would be support system. Who's in your life? Are you surrounding yourself with people that are positive and give back a little bit, or are you surrounding yourself with people that just take and
Time suckers versus time givers.
yeah.
Okay.
But the other is allowing yourself to have more of a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset, meaning you're able to look at, okay, I wasn't very good at that, so what can I do next time to do better, as opposed to, I wasn't good at that, and blaming everyone else around you and not taking responsibility.
That's good stuff. I can vouch for that in terms of the resilience. You think of something that upsets you in the day, and you're reflecting on it at the end of the day, and then in the morning you commit to not letting it have that same effect on you. And over time, those habits start to become a part of your daily life, and all of a sudden things aren't affecting you, and you're more resilient. Right? You can bounce back quicker from something that comes up again in the future.
Absolutely.
Or you can embrace the change that. There's a lot of change in it seems like just everywhere in the world right now with AI. And we had a speaker on recently who spoke about the changes in the business environment and how the perceptions of the CEOs in adapting AI or in incorporating AI were not what they were contrary to what the reality was. So they were having the more tech-savvy person in their business be the lead of the AI, whereas when they started asking the same questions to the people who didn't seem as tech-savvy, they were shocked with how much more they were able to embrace it in their everyday life.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and it was interesting because I fell victim to that as well, where I'm thinking, 2 years ago when I started studying AI, I was told by many experts, including Peter Diamandis at his Abundance 360 event, where he didn't tell me personally, he was talking to the audience. He says, you have to designate a chief AI officer in your company. Now, my company has less than 10 employees, and I'm thinking, well, it's got to be me, because who else is going to spearhead things? Well, 2 years ago, I can tell you it had to be me. but I didn't really think at the time to really seek out someone else to take the lead. And when I started giving my associate the prompts and other people in my office, the prompts to work with and how to use OpenAI and ChatGPT, I was shocked at how frequently they actually ended up using it. And one of the questions he said is give everybody in your organization a question to go find the answer for using AI and then report back. And he did that as a study, and there were so many good ideas that came out from the least suspecting places. So you support a lot of other people. You already told us that one way you stay grounded in your own life is through daily meditation and yoga. And you're married, and I don't know if your wife has any similar habits, but how do you stay sort of emotionally available in your own life? Is there something more that you do, another practice you have, or any advice that you could give?
So early on, actually, before I went to graduate school, I worked at a residential center for kids that were severely abused, removed from the home. So they would live there. There were like 3 houses. One was kids were there in crisis, so they would be there like 2 weeks. Another was a month. And then the third, which is the one I was based in, was the kids would be there up to a year.
Okay.
And we would help transition them back to home or wherever. And there was a school on the site, so the kids lived there.
Okay.
And the first month, I went home every night and I couldn't sleep. It was the stories that these children would tell me. I was like, I don't know that I could do this. And I realized, there's a long story to this, but for time's sake, I realized I had to figure out how to not bring it home with me, how to separate that.
Okay.
Because it wasn't beneficial. And that's a big part of what I work on with a lot of the professionals is how to create some habits around just their thinking process to know, all right, you're at work, you're at work, you're at home, you're at home. And it's not about shutting your emotions off, or not being compassionate or caring. You need to. That's part of who you are, and depending on your profession, that's a necessary component. But it doesn't serve you to sort of carry that when you're home, because oftentimes the people you're working with aren't. So they're at this intense moment when you're talking with them, but then they cope and move on. If you leave, in your head, you're still in that intense moment, even though they're moving on, so you stay stuck. So you have to realize that you have to move on. And it's a simple example is, you have a 3-year-old that you drop off at daycare, and they're clinging to you with their life and crying and saying, no, don't leave me. And you hand them off to the daycare provider and you leave, and they're crying and screaming, and you get in your car and leave. Well, the whole rest of the day in your head, you're picturing them being so distressed and you're upset about it. And even if that daycare calls you 10 minutes later and says, they're fine, until you pick them up and they come out smiling, then you're relieved.
Does it repeat itself the next day you drop them off if they
Probably.
cry?
So you have to accept, though, that you drop them off, they're in that moment. 2 minutes later, they're fine. They're playing with the other kids and they're having the time of their life. You're leaving and you're stuck in that moment. You need to be able to move on. And that's part of learning how to separate and how to kind of adapt to that change.
I'd say also trust your caregiver, right? Because I experienced that on more than one occasion when our oldest son, who's now 14, was 2 and 3, and I was in law school, and we'd drop him off. And you're right. There's nothing better than seeing your kids smiling, saying, bye, Mom and Dad, as opposed to, don't leave.
Right.
So it helped to see both. We've experienced both over the years. So one of the things that the Stoics say is don't be emotionless, just be less emotional. So you're not showing no emotion. Or showing less emotion. You're just being less emotional.
I understand the context and I agree with that, but I look at it as being more present in the moment. So you're experiencing the emotion as powerful as it may be in that moment. But then when you leave that situation and go on to another, it's being present for that one. So if I'm with a patient that's talking to me about some trauma, I am feeling that with them.
Sure,
You know?
you have to, yeah.
But when they leave and I have another patient come in, it doesn't do me any good to think about the patient that I was with 10 minutes earlier. So I'm present with the person in front of me. And if they're talking about this exciting, their wedding coming up or the birth of their child, I'm present with them discussing that and experiencing that with them. I'm no longer in my prior appointment.
What's the most appointments you've had in a day during, let's say, your high season?
Sometimes I've seen 14 patients in a day.
Okay.
That's not my preference, but.
Sure. No, but that's got to take a toll on your cognitive ability and your mental agility. And I think about some doctors who are burnt out because they're seeing in excess of that daily. And then I'm sometimes feeling exhausted after seeing a fraction of that in a day, is depending on how I'm spending my time in between those meetings. So is there something you do to do like a mental reset or a recalibration before you meet with that next patient?
So this is honestly where the meditation has been a huge asset.
Okay.
And it isn't something that'll work just, I'm stressed today, so I'm going to meditate. It doesn't work that way. It's more preventative. But it allows me, really, if I am feeling overwhelmed or pressured, and for me, that usually occurs if I'm running behind.
Okay.
Because my sessions are usually like an hour. So if I'm running behind, that just sets it off.
Okay.
So if I'm feeling that way, I'll take 5 minutes and just sit, meditate, and then it's like a reset button for me.
Okay. That's good advice. Being more intentional, not stacking your appointments back to back if you can at all avoid it. Give yourself a buffer time to recalibrate.
Well, it's recognizing your own individual ability to manage those kind of tasks. I know now I don't have the energy I did 15 years ago. As I'm getting older. And I know 15 years ago I could overwork and like go and go and go and go and go. And I was fine. Now I can do that, but I also know it's physically, it takes more of a drain on me.
All right,
and that's okay.
Speaking of drain and time, I know you have to get to your next patient later, so I'm going to ask you a couple rapid fire questions as we wrap up here. So a boundary you've had to learn the hard way.
Boundary I've had to learn the hard way. I guess that's a loaded question.
Boundaries there's no wrong answer.
I know. Boundaries is a big issue in my field. I think really recognizing patient versus friend.
Okay, good.
All right.
One question you wish more clients would ask you. Patients would ask. These are tough. How are you doing today, doctor?
No, I don't need that one. I think more, maybe what can I tell you that will help you better understand me? For the patient to ask me what they can tell me.
Okay.
That would be helpful.
Huh. Instead of expecting you to just ask that we'll get to it, figure it out. All right, that's good stuff. A mindset or a quote that's a daily anchor for you.
One quote that I love, and I'm probably going to butcher it, is a person is not who they are during their last conversation. They are who they've been throughout the entire relationship.
Do you remember who quoted that?
I think it was Reiki.
All right. We'll have to fact check that later, doctor.
Thank you.
All right. So what gives you hope right now?
I think just working with the people I work with and seeing the motivation and the willingness to change and the willingness to try to find positives out there instead of just maintaining this all or nothing, doom and gloom kind of mindset.
That's good stuff. All right, so tell us. Thank you for that. I know those are tough questions. Either though they're short, they're not intended to be super easy. Where can people find you or learn more about your work?
So, website is thecenterforpsychology.com.
Okay.
And I have an office in Fort Myers and Naples, multiple psychologists that work with me that are all fantastic. And I have a book called Physician Wellness that they can get on Amazon.
Okay.
I'm working on another book for non-physicians, but that one's been a little more slow coming, but hopefully that'll be wrapped up in the next year.
And if you're local, you can look them up through the Collier County Bar Society, the Lee County Bar Society, or the Collier County Medical Society.
Or Lee County Medical Society also.
Or the Lee County Medical Society. So it's pretty diverse options here. Well, so final takeaway, what's one shift someone listening can make today to build a more sustainable version of success?
I think the one shift would be to focus on how they want to think instead of how they don't want to think. So we practice thinking about things wrong all the time. You know, if we're worried about something going wrong, we'll think about it over and over and over. And okay, accept that, but then try to think about what you want to happen. Even if you don't believe it, that's okay. It's just practicing thinking the other way.
Okay, good stuff. Well, thanks again for coming on today.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. Until next